start a group, watch a few videos, though there aren't very many, and collect museum content in a notebook or in a group and share it with your friends. And when this launched, and it did cost quite a lot of money comparatively, and take quite a while, and there was, a lot of barriers to be overcome to get this site to a position of launching. Quite a lot of people looked at it and said, why would anyone want to do that? Why would anyone want to go to a website that only collects content from 7 museums and network on that website and upload their own content? Why would anyone want to do that? Why not use an existing platform like Facebook or like other creative spaces online? And I think the proof has gone to show that very few people have used it, and there hasn't really been a clear need about a clear explanation about what this service offers that you can't get elsewhere online. And the fact that it's a kind of very limited set of museums, and there are other problems with it too, have kind of helped to sort of ignite that debate about why these museums have built something when other tools exist. And I don't really want to conclude one way or the other, because it's still kind of a new site, and it may improve, and it may find an audience. But I just wanted to illustrate that debate is being had. And I think if you do go ahead and build a platform, you really need to kind of understand what the motivations are and have that commitment to keeping it alive and maintaining it and having a real plan for it. And this was a site that was a project funded, and the funding's dried up, and so it's not really clear what's going to happen with it. So I'm going to conclude with a few final thoughts. The first is a maxim that is often said by marketeers, and that's go where your audience is. And that kind of really works for marketing, it really works for promoting things. But I want to kind of extend that slightly and say, go where cultural engagement is already taking place. And sites like Wikipedia, like some of the sites I've illustrated, and plenty more besides, where there's a community of people already engaging with cultural content, already giving up lots of spare time to be passionate about something. And so far, cultural institutions, people who own their content, who have expertise in the content, aren't really taking part. And I think there's a real opportunity there. The kind of second point is this idea that, again, it kind of exists a lot within the commercial world of the web, of talking about products and web products, comparing them to projects. And I think what a lot of museums do well is kind of projects that have a lifespan, do something really interesting, promote some really good cultural engagement, give people really good experience, particularly on gallery, but also online, and then move on to the next project and maintain a kind of legacy of that project, but not necessarily having to build something big that grows and expands over time. And I think those are the kind of things that people really engage with online often. And those are the kind of things that museums can do and do well or do badly and learn from, and that will get a really good buzz online and will play really well. Whereas building products and platforms takes is a much harder thing to do. And there's only really space for a very few number of them. We've done lots of research recently of how people use the web, and often people have that kind of bookmarks toolbar along the top of their browser, and then their internet consists of clicking on them one by one. And there's only really space for about 5, so it's like email, Facebook, Twitter, maybe the news website. And so people are using quite a small number of things regularly, but then, if they're going somewhere new or wanting to go to a museum, they'll look at a website and then maybe not visit so much again afterwards. So there's only really space for a very few number of kind of products or web platforms that really have that long-term, in-depth engagement with a really big audience. And so the kind of thing I say is that you should run projects, but more contribute to projects, contribute to products that already exist online, contribute to community engagement products, platforms that are already out there and that people are already engaging. And that kind of comes down to a deeper philosophy of being part of the web rather than just being on the web. Be part of what's already out there. Link to other websites, have them linked to you, and link not just in the sense of the kind of clicking on a link, but linking databases and really forging deep connections between these kind of really big resources online. And build platforms only if you can sustain them, and only if there's a real clear need. So I'm not against museums building a community platform, doing things like Art Babel, but I think you really have to think twice about why you're doing it, making sure that you can commit to running that over a long period of time, resourcing it, having the staff to do so, making sure there's a clear user need that they're fulfilling, making sure there's something they're really contributing that people can't really get elsewhere. And because remember, you're competing with commercial organisations that do this for a living and are sort of building, making their living off it, and putting their all into it. So you can only really do it if you've put everything possible into it. And the last point I'm going to give you is something I'm a bit tentative about, because it kind of touches to the core of how museums perceive themselves. But I think it's really important when you consider how users perceive of museums on the web. And that's, I think, museums often have a subject which they kind of want to represent and to tell the story about, but neglect to tell the story about themselves. And often what users sort of go to a museum website or a cultural institution website for is to find out about that institution and the collection, a kind of a fairly narrow scope of history of why the things are there, where they came from, who collected them, and all these kind of rich stories that museums have about themselves and about the things they maintain. But, for example, the wider subject area, users often don't perceive as being something that museums are the authoritative place to go to for that information. And this is particularly problematic where you see museums where the subject area is so wide. I mean, I used the example of the British Museum, whose subject area is the history of the world. And no one's going to go to the British Museum website to find out about the history of the world. And even if they did provide the history, even if the museum wanted to do that, there's no way they could cover the history of the world. So really, the British Museum website should be about the objects and the stories about the things that are there in that narrow scope. So I think rather than trying to tell the history of the world or the history of the entire depth and breadth of your subject area, take part in building something that's already out there and contributing to that story. Don't assume that you can be the only ones who have the final say on that story. So I hope that's not too much of a bombshell. And that's the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frankie. What a fascinating story. And you stay because I want to ask you a few questions. But we stay like this. You held your presentation, and I was listening to your presentation, looking at your slides, and at the same time multitasking, which is not very easy. I tried to read what's been in the minds of several members of your audience, and one of the problems that keep popping up is how do you get cultural institutions to lower their guard, to put off their impressive war attire, and become human institutions that are not afraid to admit that there are areas in life for which they do not have the ultimate answer. That they are part of a bigger community where subjects are shared. So if you would have a magic wand, you walk into the British Museum, what would be the thing to convince them to come off their pedestal and be normal?
Well, it's a big job. I might facetiously say that time is a big way of doing that, of when the new generation of curators sort of will probably be more familiar with the bigger, wider web community. So that's one way of doing it. But there are more immediate ways, I think, if people can see what's out there and see how people are using the web already, and see how much of a small part they currently are of that bigger picture. That really helps to open your eyes to see that